You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis. Only on 101.3 Jams.
Out to the Ism, H to the Izzo. Who we got on deck right about now? Yours truly, Sir Charles.
Miss Max.
Razor.
Hey, Rod. How you doing?
And that is how we doing it right about now.
Hey, look, even when they talk, it smell like shea butter and cocoa butter and whatnot. Yes, indeed. Mike just feel nasty now. I don't want to talk on this thing.
Miss Max, you know how we do. IMHO talk show worldwide right now. WVI 101.3. Stream it. Tell a friend. Miss Max, I want to do a quick shout out real quick, and then we're gonna get to this guest for top of this hour. I mean, this is big. We're gonna give y'all a few seconds, especially if you live in an urban area. If you live in the city of Charlottesville, particularly, you want to tune in for this because we got our friends from CT here right now that's doing some great work. That's it's addressing our health and sustainment and the beauty of our community. But before we jump to our reporter friend Charlottesville Tomorrow, we want to shout out because we love the support. We have Sean Quarles, Karen Nash, James Green. Thank y'all all for sticking with us and commenting and loving and liking what we do. So Ms. Max, without further ado, let's jump to this thing. This is exciting. I've been ready for this because Charlotte always does such a great job reporting.
She does.
And this latest, I'll call it a project she's working on. The heading got me, y'all. The heading. Charlotte, you listen to this good, Ron. Queens get the money. Your borough needs to listen to this too.
All the time.
Charlottesville's 10th and Page has fewer trees and higher temperatures than any other residential neighborhoods, and it's not by accident. That headline alone talked about quality reporting.
Yeah, we talked about that. There's a similar article that was on NPR a few years ago, specifically talking about Baltimore and the economic. Charlotte is shaking her head because she probably can reference the same article, but talking about the environmental and health impacts that the lack of trees provide. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with her, and also great reporting as usual.
But Charles, for the people who don't care and they say, well, trees bring bugs,
right?
Why do we? No, let's be honest. There's some people.
Trees bring bugs.
Yeah, trees bring bugs.
That's exactly
right. Why should people care that they don't have trees?
Charlotte?
A few different reasons. Beyond just aesthetics and looking pretty, they provide a lot of natural air conditioning through shade, and it's particularly helpful if your house is, like a lot of homes in 10th and Page are more than 100 years old. Not all of them have had their HVAC and their insulation updated. So, when it's hotter in the summer because you have less trees providing natural shade, you're cranking up your AC, and then if your house isn't retaining as much of the energy, you're just putting out more emissions, which doesn't go well with the climate goals that the city and county have set. But then it's also a higher financial burden, especially if you're on like a fixed income or you're a lower income household. And then also carbon capture. Trees help capture carbon. They provide better air quality. I really focused on the intersection between environmental impact and environmental justice and public health, but also urban planning, and the role that green space plays in more than just being pretty.
So one thing that stood out to me about that, Miss Max, I'm sorry, Miss Max, real quick, and I kick it to you, was you singled out that neighborhood with being older, not having the up-to-date things. And what stuck out to me in your headline was that last phrase, that's in there, it's not by accident. True. So I'm curious about that part, about like how much of this is what the resident maybe can afford versus, is it an urban renewal issue? What are you finding there?
Historically in Charlottesville, we've seen what's happened to historically black neighborhoods in Charlottesville, and 10th and Page is one of the ones that's still standing. And then it goes back to that Baltimore heat study called Code Red, which I cited in my article, and I spoke with a professor at University of Maryland who may join us today, who was quoted in that as well. And kind of across, and I also spoke with a researcher from the Science Museum of Virginia named Jeremy Hoffman, and he was saying that there's these patterns of inequality in terms of green space You see it across the country in a lot of the lower income or neighborhoods that aren't affluent plus white tend to not have as robust urban tree canopies. And then there's this urban heat island effect where if the combination of less trees and more impervious surfaces or less energy efficient infrastructure leads to these higher ground temperatures in areas. And a local heat study actually that was demonstrated, conducted last summer, showed different areas in town that are hotter. Naturally, some more commercial spaces like Barracks Road Shopping Center, the downtown mall, like those areas obviously spiked pretty high in the heat. But 10th and Page stood out to me as one of the highest residential areas. And then the Charlottesville Tree Commission is working on a study, and they recently found that Star Hill and 10th and Page have some of the least dense tree canopies in the city. And then when we see in urban planning around the country, it's not by accident that which neighborhoods are less invested in by public governments.
Go ahead, Max, because I got something right behind you.
Charles actually asked my question, but yeah, it was just going to go to the point of who is responsible for making sure there is adequate tree canopy in these different areas. So yeah, that was it.
I guess now it's right now we're at a unique situation because the city they've adopted their comprehensive plan. There's an ongoing zoning rewrite that will be underway. This is the time for people to advocate for themselves and for others. Right. And when you see areas of Charlottesville that could benefit from more trees, speak up about it. And right now, different groups and organizations are already making efforts to replant trees. And then the Tree Commission is asking the city to adopt an ordinance that would protect trees during development and redevelopment. So largely at this point, a lot of Charlottesville is developed, but we are going to have increased density in upcoming years. This is a great chance to preserve green space, bolster green space, and make sure that the neighborhoods that are lacking are getting more of that piece of the pie, I guess.
Maybe it's the way I look at life, right?
It always is. But go ahead.
But when y'all say this, and Charlotte said, like, this isn't by accident, I would like to ask if the places that have these low density of trees also have higher crime. If they have higher crime, then I would almost venture to say that the police department has something to do with this for visibility.
Good question. I hadn't thought about that.
That's because you ain't out there in the street. I ain't either. I'm not neither. Nor was I ever.
Don't go too far.
But I'm just saying, like, I look at it totally different. You know, they view from a bird's eye point of view, right? So trees block visibility.
True.
They can't give you good pictures. I'm almost willing to bet, I'm about 99% sure that the police department has something to do with these trees being removed from urban areas for crime.
That may be the next report. That
honestly, every article begets another article. There's
so if something happened to me, I need y'all to investigate that too, right? Because I didn't snitch on them. But I mean, it's just you can't look at it from what's really happening unless you're there. So then when people go to court and they got all this information, you be like, Lord, gee, where were they? You know what I'm saying? It's because they had a clear eye view of what they needed for crime.
Now to that point, Ron, like we pick with you all the time about Queens, but this is on a serious tip though. Like I have a couple of homies I grew up with that were from Queens, and I remember hearing them say when they would come here, like that out of all the boroughs, and as city as New York is, that Queens was sort of the most rural of the boroughs, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not sure like what part of Queens that was exactly, but I'm just curious on your standpoint when you look at more of a southern city like this versus up north, because it's the same issues, right?
I mean, Alicia Keys said it in a song, New York City, a.k.a. the concrete jungle. And there's no really other way to perfectly describe specifically Black and Latino neighborhoods in the city, because you literally rarely ever see trees, shrubbery, greenery. I mean, you can even look in certain parts of D.C. now that it's totally wiped away, and it's extremely problematic. I think the health disparities, Charlotte, are one of the things that really don't get discussed, because if people are not getting proper oxygen, it is very difficult for a logical brain to assess then obviously maybe these people don't always have the best health benefits. Now their health care is a little bit higher. Then all of a sudden these are neighborhoods that are getting gentrified. So this is something that if you really strategically think about it, like Reza said, it's very difficult to not think that this wasn't intentional, even when the planning was done, 50 or 60 years ago. Question I have for you, Charlotte, is that when you were doing this study, what was one of the things that you were, I guess, most alerted by? Because obviously the study in general is obviously going to bother you. But I know in doing research, there are certain topics and certain things that you see and you're like, this is bad.
Well, it got me thinking about urban planning across the country in every city. I used to live in New York City, and I've seen which areas have public parks and tree-lined streets and which areas don't. And it's sort of one of those things, once you see it, if you haven't already seen it, you cannot see it when you look across the country at which areas have which neighborhoods that used to be black or still are majority black. That's where all the interstates are cutting through and spaghetti noodle roading through.
Right.
That's where there's less trees, there's less public investment in sidewalks, updating infrastructure, maintaining public spaces. Like, you just see less of it, and a lot of systemic racism that's been woven into this country for so long that, to varying degrees of success, people are trying to unravel that and fix that. And then also, we know that sometimes the loudest voices in the room are the ones that get to advocate and get heard and most listened to.
A two-part question before Max gets into that. So, and I know you have some planning, you do a lot of research in plan, and I know this is going to sound funny. Is it just as simple as planting a tree? Okay, because sometimes, and you know this, that's how it might be communicated to the public. That, we just throw a tree in the ground and everybody donates a tree. But how deep does this really go? It's beyond planting a tree. What are some different emissions things that need to happen in these particular areas? Like, what more needs to happen other than, because obviously we're going to do it, try to help get trees into these areas, but what are some other things that people are not thinking about that we as community members need to help with as well?
Energy efficient buildings, because about 90% of emissions locally are infrastructure and transportation. So transportation is a question for another time, but literally the emissions coming out of buildings, this can help the community overall achieve climate goals. But then trees play a role in that, obviously. And then, green space is good for public health. And as you mentioned earlier, if you have a pre-existing condition like, asthma, COPD, that's going to be exacerbated by heat-related health incidents that will be, urban heat islands when they hit. But planting a tree, yes, that's great. More of that could be happening. And there are certainly groups and organizations and the city itself that are trying to plant trees. But also caring for them, because the younger trees take time. They're really fragile the first 2 years of their life. So you can't just plant it and then just walk away
from it, right?
And then also what you're planting where, because a native species to this area is going to be more resilient and need less attention and less watering than something that should grow in a totally different climate.
Great point.
And then also where you plant too, and what types of trees. Because if you have a giant ash tree, that's going to need more space for roots, and it will get bigger and provide more shade. But maybe in a smaller area, like a street-lined sidewalk, or a smaller individual household, like plant a tree that will be more successful in that space.
Right.
Yeah, and Miss Max, like this right here is another example. Sometimes folks come at us and like, why is it always race involved? Why are you always talking about race? It's a perfect example, because you can start with a story that has nothing to do, on the surface. Like it's not intended to address race, but as soon as you get the details, like you see, like you see something else meticulously done by government, society, however you want to see it, like when it comes to black neighborhoods.
All right. I was overheard a conversation here recently, because another thing that comes into play when I listen to Rachel's comments about trees not being in low income neighborhoods is the cost of the tree. And so that conversation that I heard was, and I don't remember the name of the tree, but trees can be pretty expensive to my understanding. So when you have a community that isn't necessarily interested in tree canopy, and then people who aren't interested in covering that expense, it's easy, to skip that part. You know what I mean? But what I wanted to ask Charlotte, though, is there currently no statutes in place in the city of Charlottesville that require either homeowners or developers to contribute or plant a certain amount of trees in their neighborhood, in front of their house, or what have you? Is there nothing that kind of gives them some parameters for that?
This segues into the next article that I'm working on that should be out in a few days, I would hope, is looking at codes, ordinances, guidelines. I know that at the state level, the General Assembly passed a bill. It still has to be signed by the governor. We're a Dillon rule state, so a lot of times local governments have to say Mother May I with General Assembly. And there's a law that could be signed in the next few weeks that would allow localities to adopt, if they want to, stronger ordinances for protecting trees during development. And then I think in incentivizing developers to say, hey, if you feasibly cannot protect X amount of trees or plant X amount of trees in this new development, you can contribute money into this fund that will help plant trees elsewhere. And so I have been reaching out to Charlottesville City Council to ask them, would you support some kind of ordinance like this? And I think the next part is also looking into what already exists for protecting trees for homeowners, landlords. And I know that right now, about 70% of Charlottesville's plantable or maintainable areas, it's private property. The city has about 30% of public right-of-ways, schools, municipal buildings, parks that they can really work on protecting trees or adding more.
This is the problem. This is the problem I have, y'all.
Okay.
When these areas that y'all talking about planting these trees in, right? Like Max said, people don't have the money to maintain these trees. So that means the people that do have money are sinking money into something that they're going to eventually want to enjoy, take over. So
you saying it's a lose-lose and don't do nothing?
Well, it's something that a lot of times my community doesn't look at. Like we'll say, yeah, we need trees. I can't breathe. Help me with my COPD, right? So they say, okay, you know what, honey child, we're gonna come down here. We're gonna plant all these trees, right? So that opens up the right of way to improvement, right? Which is another word for gentrification. So then we get to a point where you can't afford to live what you asked for, and then they come in and then they move you up out of this place. So sometimes, depending on who's doing the talking, you're damn if you do, damn if you don't. You just have to, with these ordinances and these things that come in play, you have to make sure that, okay, if you do this, you put in some type of whistleblower that tells you, okay, they're trying to move you out. We done sunk $16 million in some trees, and you think we not coming down there to turn this into a dog park?
Right. Now, great point. And to me, like, that's why we got to continue to do what we do on these airwaves, and all of our people listening. And if you know somebody that ain't listening, let them know. Like, this is why we can't turn up our nose when it's time to have a discussion about recycling, about clean water, about any environmental things that's happening in city council, right? If ain't nobody down there fussing or talking about black business, like, giving black business money, then we don't want to be involved. Like, this is exactly why, and I'm hoping that this leads to more articles from Charlotte when it comes to the environmental piece, because I think we as a people got to think about the importance of it, Max.
Something else that I want to bring up, and I'm going to tell you right up front, I'm going to tip around this conversation. Let's see. So I was attending a city council meeting, and there was a discussion about redevelopment in one of our low income neighborhoods in Charlottesville. And they were discussing the tree canopy in that area and the fact that the model for redevelopment had very little to no tree canopy in the proposed reconfiguration of it. And the conversation developed into the residents of that particular community playing a large part in the redevelopment model, what they wanted to see, what they felt like their co-residents needed. But it really, to me, started to take the form of placing the burden of there not being any tree canopy there on the residents who are not planners, right? Rather than the individuals who would be responsible for making sure that type of thing occurred in that whole redevelopment process. It just, like I said, it it took the wrong tone. You know, these are not developers. They're not educated or experienced in what they're doing. And if told they need to have tree canopy, then I'm sure they would, you know, incorporate that into their plans. Right. But they're not approving anything. They have no power or authority to say what is and what isn't going to be. And so, you know, it's just, again, I guess this is just more so of a comment of, you know, there's somebody that signs off on this stuff, and they need to make sure that the people they're working with know what needs to be in their neighborhood for their own well-being, and then make sure that it's incorporated in that plan when it's finalized.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And any comment on that? I know Aaron has something for you.
I guess I was just going to say, I know that like part of the, for a follow-up article I've been working on, some of the advocates I've spoken with have been saying that they would like to see more urban foresters or city arborists involved in the approval for planning processes to say, hey, this is the best way to bolster green space for public health in this neighborhood that otherwise doesn't have it, or this redevelopment or this development. So this, I guess I can come at it from like the pure government nerd perspective.
So Charlotte, this is such an important but bothersome conversation. And so what I'm just thinking about is I was fortunate enough in the area that my parents grew up in New York City and Queens, was that we had a lot of trees. We had trees everywhere. We were in the suburb of Queens, but a lot of friends that grew up in that quote unquote concrete jungle. So the squeaky wheel, obviously, as we notice, gets the oil in our world, meaning the people that make the most noise, or sometimes it's not even the people that make the most noise, but you have resources. So I'm going to ask you a question. You live in these buildings. You're in New York City. I just read your article. I just read the article that was in NPR. You know, this is a health issue. How do those people bring this potential issue to their public politicians, to their congressmen, to their local representatives? Because reading that, you start to say, man, grandma raised us. She didn't, you know what I'm saying? Man, maybe grandma had some air quality issues more than what they were just saying, oh, you're a diabetic.
Right.
Or maybe
it first
wasn't
has to be
just
important to them, Aaron.
Right. Absolutely. But what I'm saying is just the average person, how can they bring this to light to their local representative? What if it were you, how would you go about doing it?
Good question.
I think it's a bit of a teamwork, and it goes both ways, because you get into this matter of like accessibility and engaging with your local or state or federal government. And when you think about what times meetings are had, when studies or surveys are put out, how often are elected officials, because, you know, we vote them in, they serve us. So it's how often are they, you know, providing outreach and engagement with different constituents and communities to listen and maybe lend that line and lend that ear, because sometimes not everyone has the time or the ability to show up to a city council meeting or drive to Richmond and go lobby, you know, at General Assembly. And I guess it is a little bit easier to say, okay, I'm going to email Warner, Kane, whoever else.
Yeah, but the effect, we know that we know that has
a little bit of impact, but not the effect.
And I know we're going to wrap up, but the reason I brought that up is I want everybody out there to think about this. Health is not an issue that I'm waiting to get a response on an email with.
Right.
If I have bad air quality today, in a year I could be dead. So how do we make this an issue to bring it to the light so people can start to have some level of immediate impact? So I appreciate you even providing this information.
I'm gonna have a Kanye moment here for a second.
No, you have a Kanye moment every day.
Yeah, I'm about to have a serious Kanye moment here.
Hey, can we break right here with this Kanye moment? And the reason I say that is because, the reason I say that,
Charles, stall.
No, the reason I say that is because I believe Charlotte has a special guest that has joined us, and so we should break in. You can raise a guitar, and the guest could come on.
Well, let me say my topic, and then we can come on back on. Let me at least say my topic real quick.
Okay.
My Kanye moment is, I think that, and I hate saying this, but I think my community, the black community, is going to care more about how many bugs is running around than they are their air quality.
Which is a problem.
I think that most people shut the window, shut the door, you're going to let bugs in here. Like, the African American community as a whole cares more about bugs than they do about fresh air. I said it.
All right. Razor. Yeah, so now thank you, Razor, Aaron, Max, and of course Charlotte, always for the input. So let's take a quick break, Miss Max, if that's cool. And Charlotte, as we go to a quick break, you want to introduce your special guest that joined us by Zoom?
Yes, Dr. Jacoby Wilson. He is a professor at University of Maryland. He specializes in sort of the connections between public health, environmental justice, and he was actually featured in that study that you referenced, Code Red.
All right, awesome. So we will be right back with the good doctor right after this break, y'all. Hey, stay tuned. And Charlottesville, listening audience, tell a friend. IMHO Talk Show.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis. Only on 101.3 Jams.